Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 10, Week 8. It's sort of power rankings. We'll get into it just a little bit. I am IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Steve, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Yes, I am here once again.
And I say sort of power rankings because the regular season has finished. Do we really need to do power rankings? Maybe we'll do a little bit because what we're really talking about here are the final standings. We have actual final standings because all of the games have been completed. We'll go over the standings real quick here. Up at the top are those Newport Noctel 7-1. Dropped the final match of the season. A little bit unfortunate there. Look for the Week 8 feature match when that comes out to see how the Noctels dropped that final game and dropped their shot at an undefeated season. Right below them, we've got Steve's Wobbuffets, 6-2 plus 25, the highest differential in the league. Your Bouffalant, also 6-2 plus 19. Your One Verbs, 6-2 plus 9, getting that big win finally. And those are the top four teams that we had in the power rankings in that order, and also the four teams that will be getting the first round bye. We'll go into playoff matchups in just a little bit. Then down below them, the 5-3 Summit County Psyducks, negative point differential, but still finishing above 500 to get that 5 seed. They've got a plethora of 4-4 teams. The Steamrollers +6, Agrons +5, Close Combat Club -6 to round out the rest of the top seeds for the first round. The Cincinnati Incineroar in the comeback season 3-5 -6. The Castforms 2-6 -22. The Oracorios 1-7 -24, and the Miltanks close multiple times at getting that W, but could not quite get it. 0-8 at -27. Steve, we finished another season. Season 10 regular season is in the books. What stands out to you about this season as one of our commissioners?
This season honestly went pretty well. I know I myself was a little apprehensive to the low tiered format to start, but after kind of going through and playing it, it was very nice to see some of these 80 and 100 point mons get their chance to shine. I know I have very much enjoyed Chandler and what it's been able to do for me and using it, and thinking about upcoming seasons with higher point limits, Chandler certainly won't have the same impact. So it was good to be able to kind of see what these mons can do in a format more tailored to them. Overall, also, the schedule for everything was very fair. Everybody played against teams with the same number of wins overall for the most part. If I had made the schedule right, that would be true, but I may have messed up a little bit. But that was fixed early on anyways. But yeah, fair schedule all around. Everyone playing equal strength opponents. There wasn't a group of teams that did poorly, unlike season 8. So fantastic schedule, fantastic season. One thing left to do is close it off with a fantastic playoffs and see what team can take home the championship.
Absolutely, and I know, Steve, you put a lot of work into getting those seedings correct too, and your regular season finish does play quite a large role in that, how you finish in the regular season as well as in the playoffs. Both do matter. We have a bit of a longer season. It's not quite as long as something like baseball, but it sure seems like the good teams ended up rising to the top for sure. So I think this all ended up being pretty fair. Let's see, if we do want to take a moment here before we get into the individual playoff rounds. There are 4 teams up top that don't play in the first round and 8 in the bottom here too. We wanted to take this time to highlight a couple of teams maybe we haven't spent enough time on, or we want to show off a little bit, say, hey, this team has something going for it, or this team is extremely interesting and you should be watching them. So of those bottom 8 teams that will be playing in the first round, which team would you like to highlight and talk about first?
Give a shout out to my co-commissioner, Matt, Mr. Quality, coach of the Cincinnati Incineroar, on his self-proclaimed comeback season. Of course, 3-5 isn't quite what he was hoping for the comeback season, but he's got the playoffs to make it so. Finishing ninth in the regular season might not be what he was going for, but cracking the top 4 in the playoffs would certainly be a way to cap off a fantastic comeback season. For the Incineroar season, they've been relying quite heavily on their 60-point mon, 40-point mon, Wigglytuff. One of their lower point mons, but have brought it all 8 weeks, really relying on it as a support mon, a rock setter, a wish passer with that massive 140 HP, and has kind of given his team the longevity to go through. Maybe relied on it a little too heavily at times, sometimes resulting in battles of 179 turns, but it's there and has been working for him. He's paired it up with offensive threats like Entei, Espeon, Durant, Hitmonchan, Jolteon, and Quagsire. all of them kind of contributing fairly equally in terms of kills. Some of those pieces like Quagsire being brought in, sometimes going down unexpectedly due to the opponent having a grass move. But as the season's gone on, Matt has definitely developed, and anytime someone switches a mon in on Quagsire, first thing he does is open Smogon and look, does this thing get any grass moves, anything at all? Wants to make sure there's no chance of a surprise grass move bringing out what is a fantastic defensive piece in Quagsire. His offensive pieces highlighted by definitely the Durant and Entei. The Entei's had a fairly good season, 7-5, being brought 6 times. Putting in work, favoring an agility set with it to kind of set up and sweep from there. Look for that to be key if Matt were to make it deep in the playoffs. Kind of a letdown mon would have to be the Durant, his first overall pick. Brought 5 times, only getting 2 kills, 4 deaths. I know he favored it early and kind of tailed away from it a little bit after it's had struggled with special moves. Special defense does leave a lot to be desired, but certainly has the ability to put in a lot of work in the playoffs if given the right opportunity. But yeah, overall, strong team and hoping to see some good things from it in the playoffs to really cap off this comeback season.
Absolutely. I know Matt was very much looking forward to this season. Maybe not quite working out the way he wanted to, but as we can see, actually has the same differential as the team right above him who had a better record. So maybe a little bit of an indication that Matt is just 1 or 2 steps away from knocking on the door of our top 4 and trying to get in there. And heads up, if things go the way that they should, but Matt gets that first round upset, he gets a nice little crack at the number 1 seed, which could be super interesting and definitely a way to make his name known. The pick that I will be going with, I think I've talked about him plenty over time here. I picked him at the beginning of the season as a potentially surprise candidate here. It is the Summit County Psyducks and Zach, who finished 5-3, but with a -1 differential. So definitely a story of 2 seasons for Zach, starting off very strong, 4-0, before taking 3 consecutive horrible losses, 6-0, 6-0, 5-0, whenever he really started to come around and face the top of the crop here. It was very rough to watch this team fall apart a little bit. So I'm very curious to see what kind of team will emerge for the playoffs. I know there were a lot of distractions for Zach during that time. We've talked a little bit about the Noctels, so they were a little distracted by finishing up their college as well. I know the Psyducks had a couple of plans that they need to prepare for in their personal life as well. But maybe this is the time now that he's going to be free again. We saw what happened the first 4 weeks. This could be a time for him to turn things around. I picked the Psyducks mostly because I see them as probably the best opportunity to crack into a top 4 spot from the outside in the playoffs. Psyducks have had a very nice, well-rounded team. We've talked a little bit about how he does not have any net weaknesses on the squad. It's been really cool to see him play around with a lot of different mons. We'll go into a little bit more in his playoff matchup that we're going to talk about. But it's awesome to see the different mons he can use in very different ways. And given a little bit of time and prep, which he's going to have ample opportunity to prepare over the next couple of weeks, I think this could be a shot for one of these outside teams to make it in. We saw him at the top of the league for most of the season. Maybe it's time for him to re-enter. Could be very interesting to see. But of course, the favorites are going to be those top 4. Steve, of these top 4, which one would you like to highlight or talk about? Which one seems interesting or poised to make that title run? What do you think?
For the title run, I'd have to favor myself, but I won't talk about myself. I mean, of course, all the teams here are, these are the teams we expect to finish in the top 4, and any of them could make a run at the title. We've been singing a lot of praises for a lot of these teams, so the one I want to highlight this week is the Route 1 Verbs and the creative team there. The Frutaco and the Burbs, this is their 4th season in the league, joining, kind of more recently than a lot of people, and has been able to achieve and maintain a level of success since joining. So what led him to that this season? It is the unique team with multiple different mini weather packets that have really been shining for him. He's got the Sun packet with Charizard, backed up by a just manual Sunny Day Seller, where that be, I believe, Glade has done it before, Shuckle's done it, the Leopard, all sorts of options there. Another mode he has is, of course, the Sand mode to support the Sand Rush, Lichen Rock, Midday. Shuckle, of course, set the sand for that, also benefiting from it with a huge special defense boost. He also, with his last-second trade, buffed up his Hail Core, Sandslash able to put in a lot of work with Slush Rush, and then, getting the Amara to set that Hail and not needing a manual setter to do it. These three weather packets have really kind of been the defining feature of the team. Of course, there's been consistent showings from the Vaporeon, which he's kind of relied on as that defensive answer. Wish Passer again. Fantastic defensive piece there. And then, a lot of early kind of and late to usage of Shuckle, being able to come up with creative sets for that to utilize what it can do. Overall, fantastic work. Outside of the Weather Core, Raichu putting in a lot of work as well, being brought 5 times with 6 KOs. That 110 speed really putting in the work, and then the 90 offensive, not fantastic, but in this lower tier setting, able to put in a good amount of work. Outside of that, his first round pick, Flygon, maybe not quite living up to the expectations for it. Brought 6 times, going 3 and 4. It's definitely a strong Mon, but the rest of the team kind of seems to favor others Mons to come in and set up with their weather or whatnot. So Flygon hasn't really had the chance to shine. But overall, very strong team. Definitely going to be favored in their quarters match. And then come the semifinals, assuming they make it that far, we'll start to see, if they're able to make a deep run and continue solidifying themselves as one of the top members of the league.
Absolutely. I think something that is overlooked is his continued success, which he said is, I think, his best trait so far. Season 7, an Elite 4 member in our Monotype League, ending up taking down the champion. Season 8, number 4 seed. Season 9, with a strong first-round performance in the top half of the league. And once again, back here, and the last 2 seasons we've covered extensively in the channel, it's only him and the Noctowls that were in the top 4 both times. So back-to-back buys in seasons. Maybe we're overlooking just how good and consistent the Burbs have been. And for my team that I'm going to highlight, we've talked about the Noctowls over and over and over again and how good they are, and they do deserve that praise. But if you're not going to talk about yourself, Steve, maybe it's time that I do, because I think we need to highlight your success here this season. Plus 25 being the highest differential in the league is awesome to see. I know this was similar to Matt, kind of a turnaround season for you that you were wanting to make. I know you were one of the most successful members of the league early on, but it seems like you've kind of stuttered a little bit over the past few seasons, but this is definitely a return to form for you. The team was interestingly constructed. One of the highlights of the overall draft process, I thought, was seeing the first pick Chandelure and seeing literally the entire team based around that Chandelure and trying to protect it and get everything to go around it. How'd that work out? Well, we see the KO leader Chandelure at 16 and 2. Only 2 times it got KO'd despite being brought all 8 times. I would say things worked out quite well for the Chandelure. Very nice to see the Virizion putting in a ton of work right next to it. 9 and 3, brought 7 times. Sharpedo brought 7 times. Really love that core, mostly from an offensive standpoint, but also defensively. Really awesome combinations there, getting kind of the triple core. There are a couple of times there, the Chandelure, Sharpedo, Virizion, Ghost Dark, and Fighting, and Fire, Water, Grass. Really awesome core, really creative way to bring all that together. Not just that, I really enjoyed seeing some of the lower tier Mons usage. Piloswine is a Mon that I absolutely adore seeing, and seeing that come so often, putting in a lot of work was awesome. We've seen Archeops being used in a lot of different creative ways. Even the Dracloak and Chargebug down there at the bottom, used creatively and used well and effectively. There were purposeful times when those tier 20 Mons were brought, and I really appreciate seeing the overall great team building from the Wobbuffets this season. It's led them to a lot of success. Only 2 1-0 losses to the other teams that surround the Wobbuffets. Right there in the mix, right there with everyone else. And if I always say that the rematch in which you have won is the toughest matchup in the league, well, it looks like you may just have a nice path. You were close enough to both the teams that you lost to that you only need to make a couple of adjustments to beat the Bouffalant and then the Noctowls if everything were to go as expected by seeding. So potentially, this is your chance to get back on top for the first time since Season 1. What do you think about that, Steve? How's your season been so far for you?
This season has gone quite well. I've definitely have enjoyed the battles and the teams. Team building has been pretty easy. Taking a look at teams and able to find, through my mons, a way to success and playing it out. Definitely looking to, make a return to number one. Season 1 was an entirely different ballpark. Just the original 8 people participating, and a format that maybe wasn't quite as fair as what we try to do now. So trying to get a win in a more modern for us draft league certainly is something I would love to do.
Absolutely. So with that kind of preview of some of the teams we've been looking out for and some of their opponents, it's time that we start talking about the matches. We do have this first round of 12 in which the first 4 teams get a bye. It's real simple. We've got 5 versus 12, 6 versus 11, 7 versus 10, and 8 versus 9 with floating seeding, meaning the lowest remaining seed, that is rather the seed that is the closest to 12 that remains will face the 1 and vice versa. So we're going to get into the matchups here. Here they are displayed for us straight up. The Psyducks and the Miltanks, the Steamrollers and the Orcorios, the Agrons and the Castforms, and the Close Combat Club and the Cincinnati Incineroar with the 8 and 9 matchups. We're going to go over some of these real quick for you, kind of give you a taste of what we're looking at in the playoffs coming up. So first off, I'm going to cover the Psyducks versus the Miltanks, the 5 and 12 seeds. You might expect this to be a bit of a blowout because the Miltanks haven't won a game yet, but remember, the Psyducks have been struggling mightily and do have a negative differential. We'll kind of see what maybe comes of this. On the side of the Psyducks, I said we'd talk about their team a little more in depth. Here's the promise fulfilled. We see that Mantine is brought 8 times this season. Great defensive piece. I enjoyed great success with it in Season 6 with a regular league, and now with the lower power level, it seems very tough to try and break through the water flying type, especially without a good electric type on the other side. Salazzle was his first round pick, seems to have performed okay. I think there's a little bit more potentially that Zach can do with it, brought 7 times. And then his other most favored mon, the Claydol, brought 6 times for a KD of 0 and 6. I understand that Claydol fulfills a lot of different roles, but if you know me, you know that I also like to take advantage of any chance I get to rag on Claydol. So seeing 0 and 6 on the ground type there, not the best sign, yet it has been brought all 6 of 6 times, which is a little bit crazy. As for the Miltanks, he's got a decently good mix here. It's really headlined, though, by the Zoroark and the Tyrantrum, both of which were brought 8 times. I believe those are his first 2 picks, Tyrantrum coming first. Those two actually work pretty well in tandem with each other. The Tyrantrum is such a strong threat that you have to be able to respect it, but maybe you're not respecting it in the proper way if it ends up being a Zoroark, and there are a lot of really nice mind games that he's already started to play. Keep in mind, too, that even though he's is winless, we've actually seen a much better performing Tony in the past couple of weeks here compared to earlier in the season. So really nice to see those 2 mods working together and potentially a little bit more. We've also seen him favoring the Articuno. Some interesting sets there with Manual Hail and the Aurora Veil that Articuno gets, which is really cool. Whiscash putting in more work than any of us expected, aside from Zach bringing it in the playoffs one time as well in a regular season. And of course, the disappointment for his team, the Omastar, 0 and 5 in 5 games played. I say this, however, if you take a look at the matchup a little bit, I think that Omastar may have a little bit of a chance to go off here. We see potentially a Spidef Scrafty and or potentially something like an Assault Vest Duraludon, but otherwise, Omastar could potentially go in. This could be the week for Omastar. Take a look at that coverage, and we'll see what I'm talking about. For the Psyducks, Boltund, Salazzle, and Persian all outspeed the entire team of the Miltanks. Definitely something to look out for there. I especially would highlight the Boltund being able to Volt Switch around pretty freely aside from the Whiscash, though that is relatively favored. I'd also look at the Rapidash Galar hitting both of those top 2 mons. Aurora Tyrantrum are actually a little bit tough to hit both of them, but Fairy typing is a very good way to do so. I would also like to point out one more thing for the Miltanks they've going for them. Yes, he's outsped by a lot of things, but that +1 Tyrantrum, you really don't have answers for that, especially if you can take advantage of your weakness being ground types, and the only ground type your opponent having, the Claydol. So this could be a really fun matchup between these 2 teams. Steve, I believe they also got the chance to play in the regular season, did they not?
They certainly did. Also, it was just this past week in Week 8. During that matchup, the Psyducks were able to take the 1-0 victory. As it was week 8 and both of their seasons were kind of determined for the regular season, my understanding is they kind of treat it a little bit as a meme battle, with some creative sets. Maybe not quite the full meme battles we're used to, but it'll be interesting to see them, take a realistic battle for this next match of theirs for their life in the playoffs.
Absolutely. As we said, Tony's been improving quite a bit. This could be a time where he breaks out and gets that big win. What an impressive win that would be indeed. Next matchup to cover, it's going to be the number 6 seed Seattle Steamrollers and the number 11 seed Baltimore Oracorios. Steve, take it away.
Yeah, so for this matchup, the Steamrollers have very much favored the Slowking Galar. It was a fantastic pick. I recall Chad saying, wow, this OU Pokemon was available at Tier 100. Why is it still available? Picking it up quite late in the draft, and it's been a key member for his team. His kill leader being brought out all 8 times, definitely put in the work. For the Oracorios to deal with this, it's a difficult one for them to deal with. They would be able to break through it with something like Rhyperior or Absol, able to outspeed and hit it super effectively. But outside of that, the options are quite limited, especially depending on the set of the Slowking. Other than that, the Moltres Galar for the Steamrollers, also a fantastic mon. Definitely favoring it with 7 brings, and it here has a fantastic matchup. On the side of the Oracorios, they don't really have any good dark resists, and those that they do have are weak to flying. The only resist to both being Mawile, which is, a Mawile. So Moltres Galar very much has the opportunity here to have a huge week, and between the two of them, there's not much in the form of consistent answers. On the side of the Oracorios, they've been favoring that Talonflame being brought 8 times, however, only having a KD of 1 and 7. The Talonflame, has taken the opportunities it can, but it'll definitely need to have a strong offensive performance here, especially with the weakness the CL Steamrollers have to both fire and flying. It's an unresisted stab combination, as well as each of them only being resisted by 1 mon each. If Talonflame is able to, do massive damage with its stabs, maybe recover off the recoil it tends to get with Roost, and, check its potential checks on each type of Klefki and Drudagon, then Talonflame could have a huge game. The other mon the Oracorios have brought a lot is Rhyperior, being brought 8 times, going 4 and 7. Rhyperior, a fantastic mon, great defensive piece, as well as having offenses to back it up. And his only answer to both Slowking and Moltres Galar. Rhyperior seems like a sure bring for that alone. However, it struggles against the rest of the team, with a lot of grass types resisting the ground, resists to rock, weaknesses, 4 times weaknesses or double weaknesses to ice, water, grass. All sorts of matchups Rhyperior doesn't like, so it'll be interesting to see what it's able to do, although it does seem quite important to check the Slowking Galar and Moltres Galar. But yeah, overall, excited to see this matchup between the two, who did not get the chance to play in the regular season. Correct, Nate?
That is correct, and I think you definitely nailed it, that it is the top mons going against each other that have potentially the weirdest time with each other. The Slowking Galar being very good and at the same time very weak to a couple big threats. Same goes for something like Rhyperior. That I think will definitely be the name of the game. We know Chad said to play with a couple of different teams here, but he has already faced a couple of water-absorbed mons for his Arctivish, which he has been starting to favor a little bit since picking it up. So it could be interesting to see what role that Poliwrath has as well. Chad has played around water-absorbed mons decently well. Obviously a couple of grass types. We'll see if he can keep that up this time. This should be a real fun match. It's deep inside. I definitely feel like Chad is the kind of player that will find a way to break and or sweep, but you make some awesome points with things like that Talonflame. Could be a very fun match to watch. So next up, we're going to cover the Akron Agrons Nucleon cast forms. These are the 7 and 10 seeds, and I get the honor of covering these two. The Agrons have, of course, been favoring 2 of their top mons. Well, kind of. Slurpuff is the tier 100, and it has come 7 times, or rather, it says come all 8 times, and it makes sense. That's the number 1 overall pick. 8 KOs in 8 games as well, including 1 big ol' sweep, the ability to do just about anything. but his other mon he's paired with it often is the Thwackey, who's appeared in all but one game 7 times, definitely inspiring us to potentially take another look at Thwackey in future seasons, not just in low tier. This thing has been a menace for him. His goal really has just been to set up the grassy terrain and go from there. It helps most of his team out quite a bit. They're able to get a lot of cool synergy with it. Obviously, Grassy Glide with Thwackey, but also you turning out into different things. Be able to pop Grassy Seed on more than just Slurpuff, which does get Unburdened and is a really nice target for it. But his game plan has almost entirely revolved around these 2 mons. He also has thrown in a mix of a couple other impressive mons. Excelgor at times has shown how strong it is, actually, in the lower tiers. This is maybe the perfect environment for it to be able to do something like that. The Moltres, he's got a multitude of rapid spinners, so much support to keep those rocks off the field so he can run something other than a heavy-duty boots, although it hasn't really panned out that much in the offensive department. And the Sandslash. Did you realize that Sandslash has 13 KOs this season? Sandslash, number 2 in the league. How did that happen? I'm not really sure. It's not by earthquaking during grassy terrain, that's for sure, but potentially by setting up during that time. We've seen Swords Dance Sandslash, Rapid Spin Sandslash put in a ton of work offensively, much more so than I think anybody expected it to, which is really, really neat to see. Maybe 1 or 2 disappointments on the team. Bronzong really not showing up all that much for him, but I think we can forgive that for how cool some of these other mons have been performing. On the side of the cast forms, he hasn't really been all that creative. We've seen a lot of Boots Gastrodon, we've seen Vikavolt, Diancie, Mime Galar, Dugtrio, Lola, and Flapple. Those 6 have come almost all the time. Gastrodon is the only one to come all 8 times, but the others have all come 7 or 6, which is super interesting to see. A couple of standouts for him here. Actually, the Dugtrio Alola has been very good wall breaker. This is another mon that's really benefiting from the overall lower power level and bulk level in the lower tiers here. Dugtrio, very tough to swap in, and we actually saw it in the match against you as well, Steve, that Dugtrio with a Life Orb. Oh boy, does that really sting. Potentially disappointing mon for him this season, the Miltank only being brought 1 time, which definitely seems a shame to me. I was looking at that heavily myself up in those higher tiers. It's a shame to see it only come once when it has a very interesting defensive and actually potentially offensive profile. As for the matchup itself, we've got some very interesting notes here for some of the top mons that are facing each other. We all know that Joey's going to be bringing the Thwackey. He has to bring the Thwackey. That's his grass type, whenever Gastrodon is the only mon that the cast forms have brought every single week. But I'll tell you what, that grassy terrain doesn't really help all that much. The cast forms have 10 mons on the ground, and the only other one, Vikavolt, has a bug move to hit that Thwackey super effectively, or if I can get rid of the Sandslash, or if Sandslash doesn't come, or the Volt Absorb Lantern can just Volt Switch around easily. It's actually pretty tough that he needs to bring Thwackey for the Gastrodon, but has so many switch-ins that can take advantage of not just it, but also the grassy terrain it provides. Similarly, Gastrodon is amazing in the matchup, walling so many mons, except for that Thwackey, which we all know is coming. So that's going to be a really cool dynamic to see 2 of the top mons face off against each other, or potentially try to avoid each other in the terms of the Gastrodon there. A couple of mons that really stand out positively, I would say that Slurpuff. It's a pretty obvious pick, but come on, that fairy coverage is nearly unresisted, only the Dugtrio Alola, and if we go with something like that standard Belly Drum set, you know it's going to have Drain Punch for coverage to hit that as well as easily outspeeding the entire team. So Slurpuff, definitely a standout to watch coming up in this battle. The other interesting one that's only been brought 3 times from the cast forms, that Cursula, its Shadow Ball is unresisted, and if you can find an opportunity or 2 to get it in, probably against a couple special attackers, watch out. We've actually seen how much Shadow Ball can do in a previous matchup with Chandelure, and potentially Cursula could be the one to duplicate its effect onto the Agrons this week. So overall, it certainly looks like it should be in the Agron's favor, but do not underestimate the ability to pivot around and switch around, especially if you can take advantage of the grassy terrain from the cast forms. Should be an awesome match to watch. And these teams also got to face off in Week 8, did they not, Steve?
They most certainly did. In Week 8, the Akron Agrons were able to take the 4-0 victory. On that team, of course, was the Thwackey and the Slurpuff and the Sandslash, as well as that Bronzong, who, hasn't done much and picked up his 2 KOs for the season here. So the Agrons, kind of going in with the previous win, and we'll see if the cast forms are able to pull off that rematch magic and pick up a win in the playoffs.
Absolutely, and now it's time for us to go over the final match, the one that should be the most contentious according to seeding, and honestly, it certainly seems like it would be that way anyways. So Steve, tell us about the Close Combat Club and Cincinnati Incineroar, both with potentially disappointing ends to the season. They're looking to bounce back and make a run in the playoffs.
Most certainly. So for this matchup between the Close Combat Club and the Cincinnati Incineroar, the Close Combat Club have in the past really favored Jellicent. It's the only mon they've brought all 8 times, and in this matchup, it is, of course, a fantastic bring, being a great defensive answer to Entei, Espeon, Durant. Fantastic matchups into them as well. Seems like a pretty obvious bring. On the side of the Incineroar, their defensive piece that they have favored, I mentioned earlier, the Wigglytuff. It could come. I don't necessarily say it has to here, but based on how often Matt's brought it in the past, certainly would expect it to come once again. On the side of the Incineroar, a mon that seems to have a great matchup here is the Jolteon. Outspeeding the entire Close Combat Club team was what the only resist to the stab electric moves being Manectric. A fantastic chance for the Jolteon to spam Volt Switch or other powerful electric moves and really do a lot of damage once that Manectric is dealt with. The Incineroar will, of course, also be able to, use the Entei and/or Durant to great effect. Both of them will have to, find their best way to handle likely defensive answers like the Jellicent, which might dissuade them from coming, but they're also key answers to potential sweeper on the club side of the Comfey. So an interesting dynamic there. It'll also be interesting to see if we see any of the mons that, are, in my opinion, pretty good, but haven't shown up. The Regirock, only coming once. Fantastic mon, strong defense, definitely would struggle with the Machamp, but could probably handle the Porygon Z pretty well. So we'll see if the Regirock does make an appearance to handle some of these threats. On the side of the Close Combat Club, of course, they have the big hitters they've used all season with Machamp and Porygon Z. There's not really much of an answer to them on the other team. Full defense Eviolite, could take 2 Close Combat Clubs from Machamp, and hit it back for good damage from a Giga Drain. But of course, Machamp also has knockoff, so it's kind of a one-time answer at best, and won't be able to do anything serious to Machamp besides like 50% chip or so. Porygon Z also, that stab normal. There are some resists like Durant, but we've learned Durant's special defense really has nothing to it. Certainly can't switch in to a Porygon Z attack. Definitely not more than once. It'll not last. Regirock might be a great answer. Quagsire, if it's a download Porygon, would be a kind of Matt's expected answer there. Couple options there. Talked about the Comfey earlier, has a great matchup, except, for those key offensive threats that just can't do anything to of Entei and Durant. Another big hitter is the potential of the Exeggutor Alola, with the 2 stabs working well together, and Matt, again, not having great answers. Durant would look like a great answer, except, again, special defense on it isn't real. Another interesting mod to see would be, of course, the Wishy-Washy. It was brought once, missed 2 Hydro Pumps, and that was all for it. But it's interesting to think about what a Choice Band Flip Turn from it could do. Massive damage, get momentum, and the only answer would really be Quagsire, Regirock. Tangela, of course, Tangela. But overall, it'll be an interesting matchup between the two. The interactions between their top mons, as with all of them, very interesting to see, and we'll see how they do it. And this will, of course, be the first time they match up this season, correct?
Yes, it will, and it's kind of interesting, too, because these two teams tend to have somewhat similar play styles. You can see that a little bit from the mons that they have. You realize that both of their KO leaders are their fighting types, the Machamp and the Hitmonchan, both coming several times and both accumulating 8 KOs throughout the season. Fighting types have become very strong in this overall lower-powered format. Turns out getting access to Stab Close Combat is a very powerful tool. The other big thing that they've done is favoring their fast electric types, the Jolteon and Manectric coming to more than half of their games as well, and Volt switching around or doing some other interesting shenanigans. Wish from Jolteon, Switcheroo from Manectric. These are actually somewhat similarly constructed teams. We see a lot more wishing and switching around from Matt as opposed to the Close Combat Club, who tend to kind of stay to themselves with things like Roost Zatu or cover Jellicent strength such as Zap Jellicent, but actually somewhat similarly constructed. I wonder if we'll end up seeing a longer match or if one of them will find a way to break through the other before long. So this should be a really, really nice barn burner of a match that I'm looking forward to, probably the most among all of these here. So that's going to do it for the first round of the playoffs overview here. Definitely join us next time. I'm not sure exactly how much of the playoffs we'll end up covering. It'd be nice to go week by week, but if Steve and I end up facing, we don't want to give each other too much information. So stay tuned to see what we have in store for you for the playoffs. We've got some interesting ideas coming potentially, so I really can continue to come back into the channel. Even once your favorite team is eliminated, there's going to be some interesting stuff going on. It's Season 10. It's playoffs time. Get excited, and we'll see you then.